What happens when a war everyone was promised would be quick suddenly shows up in a place nobody expected, a port in Egypt? And what happens when the President of the United States is asked about it live, on camera, and answers like a man reading a script he has never seen before? Because that is exactly what unfolded. A US-owned vessel reportedly struck at a port on Egypt's northern coast. Smoke rising over the water, phones out, people running. And in Washington, inside the Oval Office, a president who looked less like a commander and more like someone trying to change the subject. Before we go one step deeper, do me a small favor. If you want honest breakdowns instead of recycled headlines, tap that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it genuinely decides whether this video reaches 10,000 people or a million. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because this story is moving by the hour. And if you know someone who still thinks this conflict is over there and far away, send them this video. They need to hear it. Now let's slow down and build this properly, because if you only see the clips, you will miss the meaning. For weeks, the story sold to the public was simple. Strong action, precise strikes, a short, controlled operation, in, out, done. Everyone goes home. That was the pitch. That is almost always the pitch. But wars do not respect pitches. Wars respect geography, supply lines, allies, and grudges. And what we are watching now is the moment the map stopped cooperating. Look at how far this has spread. Start in the Gulf, where the tension began. Then move to Iraq, where American and Saudi aircraft reportedly hit a militia headquarters connected to Iranian-backed forces, a strike that killed roughly 20 people and wounded dozens more. Not a random target. That group is technically folded into Iraq's own security structure, which means an American strike on them is not a clean hit on a shadowy militia. It is a strike inside another country's official chain of command. That has consequences, and those consequences do not arrive on America's schedule. Then move south to Yemen, where Houthi forces reportedly launched strikes that reached refineries inside Saudi Arabia. Not one, 3. Think about that for a moment. These are not sophisticated stealth aircraft. These are cheap drones and improvised missiles, and they are reaching the beating heart of the global energy system. Then move west to the Red Sea, where the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the narrowest and most important shipping choke points on Earth, is effectively under the shadow of those same forces. Ships going through are not passing freely. They are passing carefully. Some are reportedly being told who may go, when, and under what conditions. When armed groups start behaving like customs officers, you're not looking at a skirmish. You're looking at a new order. Then move to Jordan, where a U.S. base was reportedly hit by Iranian missiles. Then to the Strait of Hormuz, where tankers have reportedly been warned, ignored the warnings, and been struck and stopped. And now Egypt. That is the part that should make your stomach drop. Egypt was supposed to be the safe corner of the region. Egypt is stability. Egypt is tourism, the Suez Canal, grain shipments, gas exports. Egypt is the country everybody quietly assumed would stay out of it. And yet, at the port of Damietta on Egypt's Mediterranean coast, a US-owned Marshall Islands flagged floating LNG storage and regasification vessel was reportedly hit by at least one drone. Not in the Gulf, not in the Red Sea, on the Mediterranean side, on the other end of the continent's shipping map. Let me explain why that specific target matters, because most coverage will skip right past it. An LNG regasification vessel is basically a floating factory. It takes liquefied natural gas cooled until it becomes a liquid, and turns it back into usable gas that can flow into pipelines and power plants. These vessels are enormously expensive, enormously important, and enormously vulnerable. They are not warships. They have no serious defenses. They sit in port like a whale in a bathtub. Hitting one is not a military victory in the traditional sense. Nobody captures territory. Nobody wins a battle. But it sends a message that is louder than any battlefield. We can reach your energy anywhere. And energy is the whole game. Always has been. Because here is what an attack like that does, even if the damage is modest. Insurance premiums spike. Shipping companies reroute. Crews refuse contracts. Ports demand escorts. Contracts get renegotiated. Costs climb. And every one of those costs eventually lands on a normal person's electricity bill, grocery bill, and fuel bill halfway across the world. You do not need to sink 100 ships to break a supply chain. You only need to make people afraid of the water. Now here is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. While all of this is happening, the flow of independent information has been getting thinner. Iranian state media accounts were removed from major social platforms. Certain maritime advisory reports that used to give sailors real-time warnings about incidents in the Gulf and the Red Sea have become harder to find. Commercial satellite imagery, the kind independent analysts use to verify claims, has reportedly become harder to access in certain regions. Now, let me be fair here, because fairness is what separates analysis from noise. Iranian state media absolutely produces propaganda. So does every government at war. That includes ours. The right response to propaganda is not to shut down every source and trust one voice. The right response is to gather more sources and compare them. But that is not what is happening. What is happening is that the number of independent eyes is shrinking exactly when the number of incidents is growing. And into that vacuum steps the official line: everything is fine, the strait is open, shipping is safe, move along. That statement collides with a very stubborn set of facts. Tankers reportedly struck, shipping firms quietly pausing routes, insurance markets pricing in danger, ports asking for protection. If the water were truly safe, the market would say so, because money does not care about press releases. Money reacts to risk faster than any government spokesperson ever will. So when a government says everything is normal and the market says everything is dangerous, believe the market. Now let's talk about the thing nobody in power wants to say plainly. America is burning through its ammunition. Modern air defense sounds magical until you look at the arithmetic. An enemy fires a missile that costs, let's say, a few $100,000. To stop it, you fire an interceptor that can cost several million. Sometimes you fire two because you want redundancy. Sometimes you fire more because the incoming target is maneuvering, or you cannot tell which of the incoming objects is real. Do that math over weeks of attacks, and you understand the trap. This is not conspiracy talk. Bipartisan defense analysts have been warning about this for a long time. Advanced interceptors take years to build. The production lines are narrow, the components are specialized. You cannot surge them like you surge bullets. You cannot borrow them from an ally who is also nervous. Once they are gone for a long, long time. So imagine you are the adversary. You look at the American stockpile problem, and you realize something brutal. You do not need to win engagements. You just need to make America spend. Fire 3 missiles. Force 15 interceptors. Repeat. Every successful defense reported on television as a victory is quietly a withdrawal from a bank account that refills very slowly. That is why these smaller attacks keep happening in different places. It is not chaos. It is arithmetic. It is a strategy of exhaustion. And it is one of the oldest strategies in the book because it works against richer, stronger opponents who cannot sustain endless cost. And there is a second layer to it. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, America's emergency fuel cushion, has been drawn down heavily over recent years. That reserve exists precisely for a crisis like this. It is the shock absorber between a global disruption and the price you pay at the pump. When that cushion is thin, every attack on a tanker hits home harder and faster. So you have a country entering the most volatile energy crisis in decades, with a smaller fuel cushion and a smaller defensive stockpile than it had a few years ago. That is not a partisan observation. That is a logistics problem, and logistics does not care who you voted for. Meanwhile, borrowing costs are climbing. Long-term treasury yields have been pushing higher. That sounds like boring finance news, but here is what it means in plain language. The government is paying more to borrow money, which means everyone else pays more too. Mortgages, car loans, business, loans, credit cards. War is expensive, and one way or another, ordinary households always pay the invoice. And then there are the troops. There are reports that the Pentagon has been considering restricting or collecting personal phones from service members at certain bases in the region. The stated reason is operational security. And honestly, that reason is legitimate. Footage of an incoming strike can reveal exactly where a missile landed, which helps an enemy correct their aim. But there is a human side that cuts deeper. Those phones are also how a 19-year-old tells his mother he is alive. Those phones are how a young soldier sends a shaky video home because she is terrified and does not know how to say it out loud. Many of these troops are living in prefabricated housing units, metal boxes, essentially. They are not bunkers. They were designed for a peacetime deployment for a region where the biggest risk was heat and boredom. Now they sit under a sky where ballistic missiles occasionally arrive, protected by an interceptor supply that is stretched thin. That is the situation. Not a video game, not a talking point. Real people in metal rooms, waiting. I know this has been a long setup, but you needed it, because without it, the Oval Office footage just looks like a strange old man rambling. With it, you understand something far more disturbing. This is the level of thinking at the very top while all of that unfolds. Quick pause. If this breakdown is giving you the context that cable news skips, drop a comment with the single word context. I read them, and it tells me what to make next. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because the next few days are going to matter more than the last few months. So, the Oval Office. A reporter asks a straightforward question: what can you tell us about the drone attack on the LNG tanker off Egypt? Is there any indication it is connected to Iran? This is the moment for clarity. This is a U.S.-owned vessel. Americans want to know who did it, why, and what happens now. The answer? Roughly, he had been briefed. It is a little more of the same, and it is going to be straightening out. Read that again. A little more of the same. An attack on an American-owned energy vessel in Egyptian waters. An entirely new front in a widening war, described as more of the same. Not "we are investigating," not "here's what we know," not "here's our message to the American crews out there," just a shrug in words. It's going to be straightening out is not policy. It is the phrase you use when your car makes a strange noise and you turn up the radio. And then, moments later, the tone flips completely. Suddenly, it is about revenge. Our turn now. They hit us, so we hit them. They are asking us not to. They know it is coming. He then describes incoming rockets traveling at extraordinary speeds and says all of them were shot down. Now think about the contradiction sitting inside those two answers. In one breath, the situation is under control and straightening out. In the next breath, we are about to hit them very hard because it is our turn. Those two positions cannot both be true. Either this is a manageable situation being resolved, or it is an escalating exchange of blows. It is not both. And the fact that both were said in the same conversation tells you there is no strategy underneath. There is only mood. That is the scariest possible way to run a war. Not evil genius, not cold calculation. Mood, reaction. Whatever feels strong in the moment the microphone is on. Then comes the China exchange, and this one deserves attention. A reporter points out a report that Iran is set to receive hundreds of rocket launchers from China moving through Pakistan. And the reporter notes that the president had said Xi Jinping promised China would not sell or supply Iran with weapons. The response? That would be surprising. Things like that happen, but it would be surprising. He told me very strongly he would not take part, and he knows I would be quite disappointed. Disappointed. Let that sit for a second. A nuclear-armed superpower allegedly arming your adversary. In the middle of a war, and the deterrent on offer is personal disappointment, like a father learning his son skipped homework. Here's the deeper problem, though. China has not been quiet about its position. Chinese officials have publicly described Iran as a strategic partner and spoken about cooperation across political, economic, and security lines. That is not a secret. That is stated policy, said out loud, on the record. So the idea that a private phone call produced a personal promise, canceling all of that is, at best, wishful thinking. Diplomacy is not friendship. Great powers do not abandon strategic interests because someone might feel let down, and this is a pattern worth naming because it explains so much. There is a belief at the top that personal chemistry replaces strategy, that if two leaders get along, reality bends. It never has, never will. Nations act on interest, not affection. Every leader on that stage understands this, except apparently the one being flattered. Then came the moment that genuinely made people stop and rewind. The proposed solution to the Iran crisis? Tariffs, not sanctions. Tariffs. Put tariffs on Iran. It would make things much stronger. I want to explain why this is not just a bad idea, but a category error, because it reveals something important. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. It works when two countries trade with each other. It only has bite when there is commerce to tax. The United States has not had normal trade with Iran for decades. There is essentially nothing to tariff. On top of that, there is already a naval pressure campaign underway, sanctions layered on sanctions, and a shipping crisis so severe that vessels are being struck in open water. Proposing tariffs in that environment is like responding to a house fire by canceling the family's magazine subscription. It is not too harsh or too soft. It is simply unrelated to the situation. And the reason given? Because a senator wanted it. Because someone noticed tariffs existed for one country and not another. That is not strategy. That is pattern matching. That is someone reaching for the one tool they know how to talk about and jamming it into a problem it was never built for. Now think about what that reveals. When a leader keeps returning to the same instrument, regardless of the crisis, it usually means they have one mental model of power and everything must be squeezed into it. Trade equals leverage. Leverage equals winning. Therefore, tariff it. But wars are not trade negotiations. Missiles do not respond to import duties. Militias do not check the customs schedule. And then the conversation drifted, because it always drifts. Asked about the meeting with Ukraine's president, the answer was that he would like him to end the war. It is very simple, apparently. He gets along with both leaders. He wants it over. Thousands are dying. Now, wanting the killing to stop is not a bad instinct. Anyone with a heart wants that. But end the war is not a plan. It is a wish written in the imperative. End it how? On what terms? With what borders? With what guarantees that it does not restart in 2 years? Because the country being invaded cannot simply announce that the war is over. That is not how invasions work. The side that wants territory decides when it stops wanting territory. So when a leader tells the defending country to end it, there is an unspoken sentence hiding behind the words, "Give up what is being demanded." And that unspoken sentence is the entire negotiation. Everything else is decoration. Then came the pivot to the pandemic, to the previous administration, to who handled what, and how many died under whom, and how one particular doctor did not help. Stop and notice the timing. There's a war spreading across 3 continents worth of shipping lanes. There's an American vessel burning at a foreign port. There are troops in metal housing under missile threat. And the instinct is to relitigate a 5-year-old argument. That is not carelessness. That is avoidance. When the present becomes unmanageable, retreat to a fight you have already rehearsed 1,000 times. The old fight is comfortable. The old fight has a script. The new one does not. And then the drift kept going. Immigration. An invasion of Europe from Africa, South America, parts of Asia. Windmills. Anytime you see them, you are apparently looking at a failing country. Parks and grass, and how grass is like human beings. Grass is a life also. A new arch. A ballroom. An airport as the lifeblood of a capital city. I want to be careful here because it is easy to just mock this, and mockery is cheap. So let me say the serious thing instead. There is nothing wrong with a leader mentioning small domestic projects. Presidents do that. What is alarming is the proportion. In a briefing where the world is on fire, the burning ship gets one vague sentence and the landscaping gets a full paragraph with feeling behind it. Attention reveals priority. Always. Watch what a person lingers on and you will learn what actually lives in their mind. The tanker was a chore to get through. The grass was a pleasure to describe. That is the tell. That is the whole story in one contrast. And in the middle of all this, a Defense Department social media account reportedly posted 3 words. Winning is not an option, before deleting it. Presumably a botched attempt at losing is not an option. A typo, a small human error by someone managing an account. But it landed like poetry, didn't it? Because it accidentally described the actual condition. There is no defined victory here. Nobody has told the public what winning looks like. Not a map, not a date, not a condition, not a single measurable outcome that would let anyone say, that is the finish line, and we crossed it. When a war has no definition of victory, it cannot end. It can only expand or exhaust. Let me take one more moment of your time before we go deeper into what happens next. If you have made it this far, you are the kind of viewer who actually thinks instead of reacting, so share this with one person today. Not 10, just one. That is how real information spreads, while everyone else is arguing over clips. Now the harder question, where does this go? Let's think like the other side for a minute, because understanding your opponent is not endorsement. It is survival. If you are Tehran right now, you are reading the same public numbers everyone else is. You see an American public that is exhausted with foreign wars. You see approval ratings in the low 30s. You see that even among the voters who form the core base, support for this specific war is weak. You see a Congress that never formally authorized this. You see protest installations mocking the war in American cities. Then you look at your own position. You are under blockade, under strike, under enormous pressure. But you have depth. You have partners scattered across several countries who can act without your direct order. You have cheap weapons that force expensive responses. And you have something that authoritarian systems always have in war. No election in 11 months. So your calculation becomes brutally simple. Do not try to win, try to outlast. Estimates from that side reportedly place their endurance under blockade at somewhere between 1.5 years and 2 years. Whether that number is accurate barely matters. What matters is that they believe it. Because belief drives behavior, and their behavior right now is the behavior of a side that thinks time is on its side. Meanwhile, on the other end of the equation, there's an ally pushing hard for further escalation, for deep strikes on hardened underground facilities, on infrastructure, on targets that would require the heaviest bunker-penetrating weapons in the arsenal, and even then might not achieve what is promised. That is the crossroads. One path is escalation into something that becomes almost impossible to reverse. The other path is a negotiated off-ramp that will be attacked at home as weakness. And the tragedy is that the leader making that choice has already shown, on camera, that he is not operating from a plan. He is operating from whichever emotion the last question triggered. Now let me bring this home, because I do not want this to feel like a distant chess match. If Hormuz stays disrupted, energy prices climb everywhere. Not just gasoline, fertilizer, plastics, shipping, food, everything that moves or is manufactured. That means inflation returns just as households were finally catching their breath. If Bab el-Mandeb stays dangerous, ships reroute around the entire African continent. That adds weeks and enormous cost to global trade. Store shelves feel it eventually. Small businesses feel it first. If Egyptian ports are now considered targets, then insurance for the Eastern Mediterranean changes too, and there is almost nowhere left in that half of the world that counts as safe water. If interceptor stockpiles run down, then American bases become more vulnerable, allies become more nervous, and other adversaries elsewhere in the world start doing their own math about what America can and cannot respond to at the same time. And if borrowing costs keep rising while all of this unfolds, the country fights an expensive war with a weaker economic engine. None of that is speculation about the far future. That is just the chain of consequences already in motion. So what should we actually be watching in the coming days? Let me give you a short list, because this is how you follow a story like an analyst instead of a spectator. First, watch shipping insurance rates and route changes. Companies do not lie about risk when their own money is at stake. If more carriers suspend routes, the situation is worse than officials admit. Second, watch what happens with Iraq. The militia leadership said a response is coming after a religious pilgrimage concludes, reportedly to avoid endangering pilgrims. That delay is not mercy toward America. It is timing. Mark the calendar. Third, watch whether independent satellite imagery and maritime warning reports come back or stay restricted. Information availability is itself a signal. Governments restrict what embarrasses them. Fourth, watch the language coming out of Beijing, not the private claims about phone calls, the public statements from the foreign ministry. That is where real policy lives. Fifth, watch the troop posture. If personnel start being moved out of vulnerable forward positions, that is an admission that the defense math has failed, no matter what is said publicly. And sixth, watch whether anyone in Washington finally defines the objective. One sentence, what does the end of this look like? Until someone answers that, every strike is just noise inside a longer spiral. Here's the thought I keep coming back to. Wars rarely begin with a grand decision. They usually begin with a series of small decisions made by people who were sure they could control the next step. Each step looked manageable. Each response looked proportionate. And then one morning the map is unrecognizable, and a ship is burning in a place nobody ever put on the list. Egypt was not on the list. Jordan was not supposed to be on the list. Refineries deep inside Saudi Arabia were not supposed to be on the list. And yet, here we are, watching the list grow while the man responsible for managing it describes the crisis as more of the same and then spends longer talking about the grass in the parks. That contrast is not a joke. It is the warning, because you can survive a leader who makes hard decisions badly. Countries have done it before. What you cannot survive is a leader who does not appear to understand which decisions are hard. An American vessel was hit. Sailors were in danger. A new front opened in a war that already spans thousands of miles, and the country got a shrug, a threat, a tariff idea, an argument about a pandemic from years ago, and a reflection on the emotional life of grass. We are told winning is not an option. It was a typo. But typos have a way of telling the truth, because right now nobody in charge has told us what winning even means. And a war without a definition of victory does not end when someone wins. It ends when someone breaks. The only question left is who breaks first, and how much it costs the rest of us on the way there. Stay alert. Stay skeptical of anyone telling you everything is fine while the water burns. Ask for the objective. Ask for the exit. Ask for the number. And keep watching this closely, because history is not written by the people who shout the loudest. It is written by the people who were paying attention when it mattered. Thank you for giving me your time today. If this helped you understand the moment more clearly, subscribe so you are here for the next chapter. And I promise you, there will be a next chapter, probably sooner than any of us want.